Hello everyone and welcome to this very special event for Orion's virtual Harrogate Incident Room. My name is Lisa and I'm the books editor for Heat and Crime Monthly magazines, and I'm delighted to be joined by three fantastic authors. We're going to be chatting about their latest novels, about their strong and potentially dark female characters, a little bit about their writing process, and perhaps if we're lucky, get a tip or two for any budding writers who are watching. So firstly, just allow me to read a tiny bit about each of the women with us tonight. I hope I've got all this right. Joanne Harris is an Anglo-French writer whose books include 14 novels and many short stories. Her work is extremely diverse, covering aspects of magic realism, suspense, historical fiction, mythology, and fantasy. Her latest is A Narrow Door, a psychological suspense novel that looks at themes of gender politics, identity, and how the past controls our future. Hello, Joanne.
Hello, it's lovely to be here.
Thank you for being with us. Holly Seddon is a full-time writer and has written for newspapers, websites, and magazines, as well as novels. Holly became a national and international bestseller with her debut, Try Not to Breathe, and her latest novel, The Hit List, is a brilliantly twisty thriller that looks at the cost of human trafficking. Hello, Holly.
Hi.
Thanks for being here. And lastly, Araminta Hall has worked as a writer, journalist, and teacher. Her first novel was published in 2011 and became a Richard and Judy read that year, and she has gone on to write 3 more bestsellers. Her latest novel, Perfect Strangers, has been described as a dark and delicious thriller. Araminta, hello.
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 Hi.
So thank you all for joining us. So firstly, let's kick off by hearing a little bit more about everyone's latest novels. Joanne, can we start with you and hear a little bit more about A Narrow Door?
Well, it's the third of a series of books set in St Oswald's Grammar School, which is a boys' grammar school in the north of England, but it stands alone. It's a grammar school that's been plagued with difficulties, and this year's particular challenge is that after 500 years of existence, it's now finally going co-ed, and it has a female headmistress. Her name is Rebecca Buckfast. I've really enjoyed writing her character because she is a complicated, difficult woman in all kinds of ways. She has a bit of a troubled past. She is deeply damaged by traumatic experiences in her youth. She's committed 2 murders, but only one of them was accidental. And she is settling down to reap the rewards of a long and difficult career of fighting the patriarchy. She started off as a young teacher in King Henry's Grammar School, which is not far away from St Oswald's, which is a kind of historical rival to St Oswald's, and now she's ended up 10 miles away as headmistress after 30 or so years of fighting every step of the way. The hero of the novel is Roy Straightley, who is a Latin master. We met him in previous books. He is a bit of a loose cannon in some ways. He's also very much part of the old school. And Rebecca Buckfast is part of the new, and this book is a kind of dialogue between both of them, which is kicked off by the unfortunate and accidental discovery of what looks like human remains on the site of a grand new sports building that the headmistress is having built for the beginning of term. She manages to talk Straightley into not going to the police until she has finished her story. So it ends up being a kind of tale within a tale. We have to find out who the body is. We have to find out why Rebecca wants it hidden. We have to find out who she is and why she is the person she is now. I had a lot of fun writing it.
We're going to talk about Rebecca a lot, I think, but she is quite a character, isn't she? She is amazing. Thank you. Holly, can you tell us a bit about The Hit List?
How do I follow that? So, yeah, The Hit List essentially asks, what would you do if you found your name on a hit list and you had no idea who put you there or why? And it features the story of Marianne, who's a pretty young widow, and it's the eve of, she's newly started a relationship. She's sort of emerging from a year of grief, and it's the eve of the anniversary of her husband's death. and she starts to look through his clothes. She wears his shirt, she sprays his cologne, these sort of rituals that she does when she's missing him. And she reads through their old emails together, and she goes back to the start of their relationship and the first "I love you." And she switches to use his machine, and she starts looking through that for these sort of any nuggets and scraps of affection that she missed before. And it's while she's there for the dark web. And she follows it, and she tries to understand what he would have been doing on there. It's completely out of character. And while there, she stumbles upon her name on an assassin's list. And there begins a cat and mouse tale of adventure and darkness, and lots and lots and lots of hidden nastiness. And yes, that's the essential.
There is so much in this book. I finished it the other night, and it's so good. It's such it's so quick. It's such a pacey thriller. But when you start looking at the themes, which we're going to look at later, there's a lot going on. But yeah, the moral is, don't look at his computer.
Don't look.
You're not going to find anything you like, let me tell you. And Araminta, can you tell us about Perfect Strangers?
Well, Perfect Strangers is about 3 women who are in their late 40s now, but they met sort of 25, 30 years ago. And they've always been incredibly close best friends. And the book begins with Nancy, who is the one that they perceive as having this very perfect, charmed life. She's found dead, I mean, presumably murdered. And the book is told in 3 sections from each of their 3 points of view. And Nancy's point of view comes in the middle of the book. So we already know she's dead. We already know that the investigation into her death has pretty much stalled. And so we get her story right in the middle, but we still don't know who's actually killed her. And the book's sort of not so much really about who killed her, or even really why. It's the her 2 best friends are so consumed with grief that they try to understand what could have happened to their friend. And as a result, they sort of start questioning. They start realizing that they really didn't know her at all, and that all the things they perceived about her to be perfect really weren't. And it really sort of leads them full circle into they start realizing that they barely even know themselves and each other. And so the book is really about sort of trying to find out who we all are, really. But yeah, I can't really say a huge amount more because
it's one of those ones.
Too much away.
You don't want to give too. I mean, I think it operates brilliantly as a who done it as well, and a why done it. But you're right, it's a lot about those 3 fantastic women. So let's talk about ladies. In each of your novels, women are front and center, and they are not ladylike women, are they? They are morally complex. That's a nice way of putting it. Morally complex, with a lot of light and dark. So what was it about each of your leading ladies that captured your imagination when writing them? And how did you go about crafting such nuanced and powerful women? Holly, can I start with you? Because what we've got is Marianne is an every woman suddenly thrust into an alien world of the dark web and assassins. Where does Marianne come from?
Well, Marianne really was my attempt at an every woman. So for the story to work, and I'm like Araminta, I'm like navigating, not giving things away and trying to, but for the story to work, it had to be genuinely shocking that she found herself on it. So if she was a baddie and involved in organized crime and she was on an assassin's list, well, kind of, yeah. So she had to be very, very normal. And I thought about the most sort of, like a very sort of trusted position in society, and somebody who, you know, had to also have checks and balances about the behavior. So I made her a teacher, which also added in some interesting sort of nuances in that she, I think, had to present herself. It gives her multiple sort of sides to her personality. So a side that she literally presents in the class, you know, the side that she presented within her marriage, the side that she's presenting within this new relationship, which is very, very new and not one she expected to be in because she didn't expect to be a young widow. And all these sort of different sides help build a nuanced character. But I'm always really horrible at answering these questions about character because they do kind of arrive fairly fully formed. That's when I know a character is working. If I'm having to chip away at a character and try to think, well, what would make them more interesting? Or if I gave them this, doesn't really work for me. So I'm kind of jealous of people that can do that and can just build block by block a really interesting character, but that's not how it works. And she actually appeared to me on the street. I live in Amsterdam, and I was walking, and there were lots and lots of very glamorous, very tall, very blonde women here. So I was walking down the street, and a very pretty but not tall and not blonde woman was standing outside the soup shop on my corner, and she had this look, and she had this curly hair, and she had this kind of frown, like there was, her friend was talking to her, but she was frowning like there was something else going on behind. And I was like, that's Marianne. She just, wow. And from that, she as a person, as a character, arrived pretty fully formed.
Which is really good. I mean, you're saying that you're jealous of people that can build in block. I'm sure everyone is going to say, I'm really jealous of you dropping into your brain with this fantastic character, because she is fantastic. But it's interesting that she's a teacher, because Joanne, your central character, is seen through many lenses, isn't she? Rebecca, Becky, and Lebuckfast, which I love. And she's an extraordinarily layered character. So where did she spring from?
Well, I think, like Holly, I don't tend to feel that characters that I create are built from blocks. What I try to find is the voice. And nearly all my characters find themselves in the first person. So this is a book with 2 first-person narrators. And as soon as I can hear the voice convincingly, then I can get a kind of handle on the character. And Rebecca Buckfast is... what I like about her is that she is not a young woman. She is a woman in middle age. We see her as a young woman. We see what she's had to do to get where she is. But it struck me that there are not very many stories about women in middle age. There are lots of stories about young women. There are some stories about old women, but this one is, you know, she's a headmistress. She has been a teacher. She's been good at it. I think inevitably people are going to think that she's a bit like me, because I was a teacher for 15 years at a boys' grammar school. And actually some of the things that happened to the young Becky Price at King Henry's actually did happen to me when I was a teacher in fairly similar circumstances. But she isn't me. She is much more ruthless. She's much more aware of what she has to do and of what she wants. And she is also deeply damaged. I think, you know, she is the villain of this piece. She's definitely a murderer. She is quite a nasty piece of work in all sorts of ways. But I couldn't help but like her from the beginning. From the beginning, when she introduced herself and said, you know, this is me, this is what I've done, I thought, you know what, I want to know why. And so some of the process of writing the plot was to find out why she'd become this person, how she'd got away with it. But there are lots of things that I like about her, and people who have read the book, the advanced copies of the book, seem to like her too.
She is one of those characters. We're going to come back in a second to how morally ambiguous these characters are, but it's interesting that you call her the villain. I don't know that I actually thought of her as the villain, and that Straightly as the hero was also an interesting thing, because she is so, you can't help but root for her, because she is a woman in a man's world, and she has to do what she has to do, and she certainly does it. She does not pull her punches. But it's interesting that you talk about middle-aged women, because Araminta, we have got 3 complicated, rounded, and decidedly middle-aged women in your novel as your central cast. Tell us a bit more about these ladies.
Yeah, I think I'm a bit of a I mean, I agree with Joanne and Holly that characters do have to sort of come to me, but they definitely don't appear fully formed. And I do quite a lot of, I now feel really boring for saying it, but I do quite a lot of building block work on my characters. I'm really like to know them very, very well before I start writing, and then you probably get to know them best in your first draft, and then you can obviously your first draft is terrible. My first draft is terrible, so I can scrap that and start again. But yeah, so that's how they came to me. But for me, I mean, it's interesting what Holly said about every woman. Like, my characters are not every women in that that they certainly don't they'll be very different to a lot of people, but I did want to try to embody that feeling that I think we have as women of always striving for perfection, or always thinking that we're being judged. Well, probably not thinking, actually being judged in society for how we function, how we live, how we dress, every aspect of it. And I was sort of interested in the idea of three friends who really love each other deeply, and they genuinely do, but they still have judged each other internally in so many ways. So it was very important to me for them all to be very flawed. I mean, I think we're all very flawed characters. There's nobody who isn't very flawed. So I think there are times that you are really rooting for each woman, but there are times that they probably really exasperate you. And I don't think that either one of them is more the protagonist than the other. I mean, I was thinking that when you asked that question, I thought, oh goodness, I don't actually know who my protagonist is. It feels like it's all three of them. So yeah, I think it was just trying to make them as rounded and human as possible, really, and as believable as possible, which does sometimes, you can sometimes then fall into the territory of having a character that's a bit unlikable. But I think we're all quite unlikable sometimes. And hopefully you like them all by the end.
Well, this is a very neat saying. I feel like I've paid you to do this, because my next question is about that exact thing. Because these women are, like we said, morally ambiguous. They all manipulate the truth. Honesty is in very short supply, and they are all tied up with some very dark deeds, some more than others, but they are all a little bit, well, I mean, flawed is a good word. But do you think that thriller readers and readers of books like these prefer their characters and the narrators and protagonists to not be entirely sympathetic or even likable? And do you enjoy writing women who are capable of such dark deeds? Is it much more interesting for you as writers for them not to be particularly likable or always likable? Joanne, can I come to you first?
Oh, absolutely. I love writing villains. I love writing people with moral ambiguities and hidden secrets, because actually it's much more interesting to unpick a character and to find out why they have become this person and who they were beforehand. And a lot of my writing is about the past and the huge amount of baggage that everybody carries with them from the past. And so usually with my characters, and particularly with my morally ambivalent characters, if you like, a lot of it is going into the past and unpicking the past and trying to work out at what moment they crossed that line between being innocent and being guilty. And with Becky Price, soon to be Rebecca Buckfast, it starts early. She is a victim for a long time. Her defining incident in her childhood is the disappearance of her brother, who disappears aged 14 from his school, which happens to be the school where Becky becomes a teacher later on, for reasons that she's thought out quite carefully. And nobody ever finds out what happens to him. And it destroys her family. It destroys her childhood. And she has this immense baggage of responsibility, because she feels that her parents loved him better, that they feel that the wrong child disappeared, and that she's always been second. And as such, I feel for her enormously, and I love the fact that all this questionable, flawed behavior comes out of what is essentially a reaction to trauma.
Mm. Yeah. I think you're right. I mean, just thinking about when I was reading it, there is a lot of sympathy to be had for her, which is why I never saw her as a villain. But the more you speak, the more I'm thinking she is quite villainous. She does do some things which are, not the greatest. A bit like your ladies, Araminta. I feel like yours do things which any of us could do. Mm. It's, they are very real women. But so was it fun to construct three women who are all equally damaged, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I think that they are. I mean, I totally agree with what Joanne said about, you know, that, I mean, you don't really want to create a villain as such. You know, you want to create someone who's morally, that's what moral ambiguity allows you to do as a writer. It allows you to give a reason to why your characters are behaving in the way they're behaving, which, you know, hopefully you manage to do. But it's and that, I mean, I think that's the fun part of writing, is thinking, you know, we all have reasons as to why we behave in a good way or a bad way, and they've almost always got to do with, you know, things that have happened in our past. So I think that's the really fun part, and I think that's what I meant when I was talking about constructing a character beforehand, is that my character arrives, yes, she arrives like fully formed, but I need to know why she's capable of doing the things she's doing. And yes, I wanted to give all my women, I mean, all my women do something pretty terrible. But I agree. I think there are things I can imagine doing in each circumstance. If it, you know, if it's terrible to admit it, but I can imagine doing all those things. So you want the reader to feel sympathy with why they've been pushed into this place. And I mean, moral ambiguity is sort of essential, I think, to writing a character, because we all are, really, aren't we? So, but yeah, so I agree with that.
Definitely. Holly, are we allowed to talk about the character who is not Marianne? Just answer me that.
Yes. I know why you said it like that. Yes, let's.
I don't know if we should.
Yeah, there are some reveals that come later in the book around the person who's the assassin, which to talk about them in too much detail would sort of give away some of the elements of the first section. But we can talk around the assassin and their motives.
Yes, whatever you can tell us about, because it's a fantastic character, and I'm going to do this so that I don't say too much, but what can you tell us about this character's moral ambiguity without giving anything away?
The character is really, it's kind of one of my core beliefs writ large, which is that no one is an out and out baddie, nobody, and that no baddie, as we would consider somebody to be, believes that they are the baddie in the piece. So Darth Vader thinks he's doing the right thing, for example, you know. And I wanted to write a character that really took that to extremes. But I also don't believe that anyone is an out and out hero. So I have two sort of characters that on paper are the hero and the villain, but actually neither is either of those things. And I found that very exciting to write, and it was a challenge. And you talked earlier about likability, and I would say that I have never aspired for likability for any of my characters, but what I've always aspired to is plausibility, which is quite a challenge when you're talking about assassins. People find themselves on a hit list. And like Araminta said, they may do things that you wouldn't on paper think that you would do, but I think the challenge of writing these kind of stories is taking a reader from a position of starting this through all the actions that those characters take, and even if it's not what they would do, they can absolutely believe that that's what that character would do until you have delivered them to a point of no return, when really there is nothing. It's almost like just such momentum forcing them to do these terrible things. It's almost like a foregone conclusion, and the reader goes with them. And as a writer, that's just incredible fun. I just really like writing it.
It's interesting. Fun's interesting because these are books that cover, all of them cover timely topics and important themes. We've got trafficking and control and gender politics and illicit relationships. So how important is it to reflect social issues when you're writing crime and thriller? But also, is it possible to have fun whilst you're writing quite a dark book, if that makes sense? Araminta, can I come to you first?
I'm always really motivated by reflecting social issues, but you can't be too worthy about that, or it becomes a bit boring, and you don't want to write a sort of political manifesto, or you might as well do that, I suppose. I don't know about the fun. I mean, yes, I mean, hopefully there's a bit of fun within your book. Not sure I would describe writing as fun, but I think that might be a different thing. But yeah, I mean, definitely, I think crime and thriller occupies a really unique position. I mean, obviously, every book can delivers a message, but I think crime and thriller is so brilliant because you can create these wonderful, intriguing, engrossing stories that you're completely wrapped up in as a reader. And then at the end, you're like, oh, wow. And I've now thought about this. And I mean, I find that, I mean, obviously I read loads of crime and thriller, and I'm so often struck at the end of a book by, I've been taught something. I've been totally engrossed in the story while I'm reading it. But then when I reflect on it, I'm like, God, I've been taught something, and it's so interesting. And I've learned something I hadn't known about before. And I think that I really think crime and thriller, can operate on those levels so seamlessly, and it's so exciting to be able to write like that. I mean, if you can pull it off, it's really great. Often you feel like you don't, but you can try.
You definitely do. I mean, Holly, for you, it's about trafficking, which is and modern slavery, which are really important issues. So, what brought you to that issue in particular?
Well, I mean, like Araminta, I think that crime and thriller provides a framework for taking it in almost any direction. But the more books, I've not written as many books as you guys, but the more that I've written, the less flippant I want to be. I talked earlier about it being fun to write. It is fun to write when it's going well. It feels fun, but the subject matter isn't fun or sort of lighthearted. And I think when you are dealing with life and death, so the more books that I write, the more seriously I want to take that. And I don't just want to explore, I don't just want to sort of shock people or sort of take them on a sort of a limited journey for the fun of it. I want it to mean something. And I think if you're dealing in life and death, then it has to happen for a reason, I guess. Somebody finding their name on a hit list couldn't possibly, we don't live in a world where that could just be done for no reason whatsoever. There has to be some real weight behind that. That the initial idea was around somebody finding their name on a hacked hit list, and it was essentially from the Ashley Madison scandal. I don't know if you remember about that tawdry website that was hacked into, and I was noodling with that for ages, just thinking what a shock it would be to find your name on there if you'd never joined that horrible website. And from that, it went into, let's make it bigger, let's make it life and death. But once I'd done that, I really wanted to find the reason a good reason that would actually be worthy of doing that. And I think it's, somebody asked me about this and whether it came from living in Amsterdam, which I'd not thought about until she asked me. But actually, I do think a lot of it does come from an awareness of, Amsterdam is famously a port. It's somewhere that a lot of people, often women, pass through into prostitution, which is legalized here or decriminalized. But that is one side of it. It's not all regulated. People can pass through and be lost. And I mean, I think that's such that we live in a world where that can happen, where any one person can just be lost, is outrageous. And because there are so many people, the numbers are so high, it just becomes a statistic, and that's just unforgivable and unbelievable. And I guess that sort of wormed its way into my mind was something that was pressing on me when I wrote this. But like Araminta, I didn't set out to sort of write something that was didactic. It has to be, somebody has picked up a book expecting to be entertained, that's my obligation to them. But if within that I can shine lights on areas they maybe haven't read about, haven't thought about from that angle, then I think that's a really good thing to do with my time, and hopefully a beneficial thing for a reader as well.
Yeah, it's a very powerful novel, like you say, but without feeling that you're being lectured or in a didactic way. It's just part of the story, an organic part of the story, but it is a very powerful and very timely issue. And Joanne, with yours, I was really struck by the patriarchy that she exists in, and the kind of gender politics and the constant fight of being a woman in still a man's world. Is that what was preoccupying you?
Well, it's very much what I felt when I was in teaching, and it's set, some of it at least is set in the 80s, because I wanted to try and recapture that idea of being one of the very few and the youngest female member of staff in what is essentially a very male environment. You know, I turned up at Leeds Grammar School. I was one of a handful of women teachers. On one of my first days, I was shouted at in the corridor because a male member of staff thought that I was a boy because I was wearing a trouser suit. And there was a whole lot of you know, gender-related stuff that I think people weren't even aware of at the time. You know, I was told that I had to wear a dress and not trousers. I was told that I was mistaken for the secretary so many times. It was an interesting. I mean, I loved being a teacher. I very much enjoyed being in that environment, but I felt that I had to prove myself so much and so often. And so writing about a woman in a slightly similar situation, I used some of that experience to bring that into the story. And Rebecca is very much aware that she is fighting the patriarchy, and not just that patriarchy either, the patriarchy outside. She is a woman who has in her youth been spectacularly beautiful and has the advantages and disadvantages of this. In later life, she's really quite grateful not to be beautiful anymore, that she's now allowed to be powerful. And she has ambition. She has ambition, and she lacks that kind of stereotypical motherly kind of aspect that these men expect her to have. And so I liked writing a woman who is deliberately not being typical. But she is very good at using whatever tools she has at her disposal. And so she's quite happy to use her attraction to get what she wants. And she's also quite happy to use sneakiness and underhandedness because she's ambitious. And women are not supposed to be like that. They're not supposed to be ambitious. They're not supposed to be violent. They're not supposed to have bad thoughts. They're supposed to rise above these things. And Rebecca really doesn't. She plays dirty all the time. I really enjoyed that aspect of her. And also she has no sense of remorse at all. She just does things because they have to be done. And, you know, if that means getting rid of somebody, then that too just has to be done.
She's very enjoyable, but you don't get any sense that she's sociopathic in any way. She just does what she needs to do. She's just been presented with a set of circumstances, and she just does whatever she has to do to fight it. You kind of get the sense that these men kind of have it coming in a way.
And they do.
Yeah. Let's ask you a bit more generally about crime and thrillers, and the fact that women are the greatest consumers of both true crime and crime fiction. Do you have any idea about what it is about these genres that speaks to women? And also, what is it that attracts you most about writing in sort of the crime and thriller world? Holly, can I ask you?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any sort of stats or any sort of academic thoughts around that, but I do think that, well, I mean, I grew up reading adventure stories because I couldn't really have a lot of adventures as a little girl. And I think that really crime and thriller gives that same kind of feeling to adult women. You know, our lives are still often more restricted than men in terms of our safety, going out at night, in terms of often we are the main caregivers, so we are more rooted in the house. I mean, it's not always that way by any means, but you know, often we have more caring responsibilities, so we're expected to sort of refine those nurturing soft skills. And crime and thriller gives us a chance to nurture even if it's just mentally, there's other sides to our personality. We get to have some adventures. We get to, you know, kick some, can we swear? Kick some bottoms.
Yeah.
And I just think that's something we all, you know, we all need to explore different sides to ourselves. And I think it's, you know, it's just an exciting thing. And what was the second part of the question?
I mean, that was, what is it attracts you about writing it? Is it the same thing, just that you want to put yourself in that adventure story state?
Yeah, they're just, I love asking what if, and I love making it a really big, dirty what if, and then taking myself through that. That's really good fun to write.
Joanne, like we said in the intro, you've written in a lot of genres. I mean, you've written some of the, you know, the most beautiful novels I've ever read. What's brought you back to thriller and psychological suspense?
I would say that pretty much everything that I write has got some element of suspense. And I think because everything I write is character driven generally. So it's a question of how interested you want to be in those characters, how much you want to go into their potential, how dark their potential can be. And when I write these thrillers, and they're in a particular kind of area of writing. I mean, I'm quite interested in the idea of identity and how we present ourselves to people and how other people see us. And so much of my thriller writing, if you want to call it that, is about hidden identities or secret identities or past identities or multiple identities, and this idea of perception of the world in different ways through different people's eyes. And so this is why I write in the first person as much as I can. And here, you know, I've got these dialogues going on between very different characters. And I mean, from an entirely personal perspective, when I write thrillers and when I write crime, it feels cathartic because I have gone out of my way to make sure that there are no women victims here. All the dead people are men or boys or people who in some way would in another world be there solving the crimes, and the woman would be in a skip somewhere and we wouldn't know much about her except that, you know, she was the victim. You know, I'm aware that there's still a fair bit of this happening in crime fiction, and that's fine, but you know, it's quite interesting to look at the opposite side of the coin there and to say, what if this completely respectable, middle-aged headmistress were actually the perpetrator? And we knew that from page one. How can I keep the reader interested, having revealed that right from the start? How can I keep that reader turning the page?
Which you do beautifully. And Araminta, why do we like crime and why do you like writing crime?
I think actually we maybe as women like crime because we still do live in a scary world. You know, to be a woman is scary in so many aspects. And I think one of the reasons that psychological drama is, or thrillers or whatever you call it, is so popular is because being inside a home can sometimes be a very scary place for a woman. Being inside our minds can sometimes be a very scary place. And what more sort of pertinently, that's the message that society gives us, that we are unstable and we are in danger and we are, you know, I don't think we can help but feel these things as women. And I think that, you know, and it is a totally different world for us, you know. When my teenage daughter goes out at night, I'm worried about how she's going to get home. When my teenage son goes out, I'm not particularly worried about how he gets home. And it is because, you know, and those are the realities we live in. And I think that we can't shy away from it and pretend that doesn't exist. And I think what crime and thriller does is it takes us up to the edge and it shows us solutions. And I think that's very cathartic for women. And I totally agree. Having women in control, women perpetrating things is really important. And I do agree, like we, you know, the trope of the dead woman in the skip is difficult to read as a woman now, difficult to, but I think crime and thriller I think it's a very sophisticated form of writing crime and thriller actually. And I think it does follow trends and feelings and, you know, the zeitgeist. And so I think it has, I've really noticed a shift in the last few years away from that. And I think that, you know, when you watch crime and thriller on the TV now as well, it's moved away from that as well. It's much more character based, much more, which is, and that, I mean, that's why I love writing it, because, you know, I love writing, you know, that's what interests me is the characters. So, and it's just, and also, you know, my favorite books are filled with great characters and they tell a beautiful story, but ultimately they're really, you know, they're interesting and exciting and you want to turn the page. And so I mean, I sort of think it's such a great combination of everything, really.
It really is, and you all do it so beautifully. Now, we've only got about 5 minutes left, so because lots of people who come to Harrogate are, of course, wanting to write themselves, they're all budding writers. So if we can just finish, would you mind giving us your top 1 or 2 tips about how they might go about crafting a psychological or crime thriller? Joanne, what would your top tip be?
Read. I think it's everybody's top tip, and I'm sorry, I've probably stolen it from Holly and Araminta here, but you have to read a lot, and not just crime either. I think, you know, I think it's important to read outside of the genre in which you're writing, because you never know what you're going to find. I've found some really excellent plot ideas in science books, psychology books, the news, online, all sorts of things, but reading is absolutely essential. And I still hear from many people who are wanting to write that they just don't seem to have time to read. And I don't think that anybody can feel that they're going to write anything worth reading until they have read an extraordinary amount and are able to look at it and understand why it works and why they love it and what parts of it they feel that they would like to express in their own work. And there's that. And I think my second thing is giving yourself permission to write, giving yourself permission to say, I am a writer. I'm not necessarily a good writer or a professional writer, but it is something that I take seriously and that I want to do. And I would appreciate the help and cooperation of my loved ones in pursuing this, because particularly as women, it's actually quite hard to carve out time for the things we really care about because other things get in the way. So yes, giving yourself permission.
Beautiful, thank you. Araminta?
Oh yeah, I totally agree with both those points. I mean, the reading obviously is totally fundamental. It's always, if I'm teaching and someone says they don't read, I'm always a little red flag goes on in the back of my mind. I'm like, oh God. But also the other thing I would say about reading, I totally agree. Don't just read. I mean, you have to read completely in the genre that you want to write in, but definitely you should be reading lots of other things. And it's very interesting. I mean, you know, that lots of our greatest classics, I think you could put into so many different genres, you know, like if you think of, you know, like the Brontes or, you know, Daphne du Maurier, all her books, you know, you could class them as thrillers, you could class them as romances, you could class them as literary fiction, you could class them as historical, you could class them as anything. So I sort of think it's really interesting, whatever genre you want to write in, you are going to learn lessons from everything that you read. And also, I would also say just write, because, well, this might just be me, but the first thing that I write is always so bad that I think you've sort of got to get over the fear of that, so that you can write something good. So, yeah, I always say to people, yeah, number 1, read, and secondly, just start writing. And it probably won't be worth showing anyone, the first thing, but the second thing might be, and then the third thing almost definitely will be. So yeah, that would be my advice.
Thank you. Holly, what about you?
I would agree absolutely with reading, and read with great joy and great passion, and don't think about what you should read, think about what you want to read and follow that, because that will help you find what you want to write. And absolutely, I think it's Joanne who said gets ideas about plots and things from all sorts of sources. And I similarly get ideas for my books from completely speculative books and historical books and all sorts of books, and that no genre is lesser than any other. So, you know, just life is way too short to only read the books you think you should. And from that is write what you want to write what excites you. Don't write what is currently selling, because in 2 years it'll be something different. Write something that you will want to read over and over again, because you will read over and over again when you're editing it and rewriting it. And just, you know, that's how you find what kind of writer you are. And the other thing I would say is, don't be daunted by the size of a book. Just enjoy writing a little as often as you can, because it adds up. And if you are sort of panicked about the idea of writing 90,000 words, well, don't write a short story. Find your way in that way. Just writing is such a pleasure. And it's, if you have the urge to do it, not writing is the worst thing ever. So if you feel like you're a writer, then yeah, like Araminta says, just write.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. One last question. Do you think your genre finds you, or do you find your genre? So do you just sit down and have a story and write it and see where you go? Or do you think, right, I'm going to write a crime novel? Araminta?
I would say it finds you, because I don't think, I mean, I certainly, when I started writing, I just, you know, my first novel was just inspired by the books I love. You know, I grew up reading like Patricia Highsmith and, well, just such a huge range of writers, actually, you know, Carol Shields, you know, Iris Murdoch. So I wouldn't have been able to tell you what genre anybody wrote in who I liked. Oh, I wouldn't have been able to tell you the genre of contemporary books that I loved as well. So, but I mean, I think your genre finds you, because as soon as someone said to me, oh, you're writing, you know, domestic suspense or thriller, I was like, oh, yes, I see that I am, but I hadn't. So I don't know. I mean, I think that's what Holly was saying as well. I think if you sit down to write and you think, I'm going to write crime because I know it's, you know, Lee Child sells millions, so I'm going to then sell millions. I don't think it's really going to work. And just like, I think if you sat down and thought, I'm going to write a Booker Prize winning novel, you wouldn't be able to. So it's like, I think you just have to write what you want to, and so the genre will find you in the end, basically.
Do you agree, Holly?
Oh, completely. When I wrote my first book, I had no idea what it was. And I actually told an agent that it was commuter fiction, meaning something you'd read on a train. And she was like, no, this is what it is. But I also think that some of the best books straddle multiple genres, and how they get packaged is somewhat out of an author's hands anyway. So yes, I have been packaged around me quite happily without really knowing exactly what I was writing.
Oh, and Joanne, as someone who's written multiple genres, how does one find one genre, or do you just not worry about it?
It's not something that I've been thinking about very much, really. I mean, I will write a book, and usually it crosses over several perceptions of genre anyway. And so I just let the marketing people do what they do. I'm not even sure whether A Narrow Door is supposed to be a psychological drama or a thriller or crime. It could be any of those things. To me, it's not all that important. It's, you know, I just hope it finds its audience. And I don't write for any particular person in mind. Just anybody with a pulse will do. And if they see something in there that responds to them and that they feel, then good, all the better.
Well, that's an amazing little soundbite to end on. And good life advice. Anyone with a pulse will do. So just finally to say, the Hit List and Perfect Strangers, they're out now. We can get those now. And A Narrow Door, I think, is August. Am I right in saying?
Yes, August the 4th, it will be coming out on.
Something to look forward to. So thank you all so much for joining us. And thanks to everybody. And I hope you have a fantastic rest of Harrogate, real or virtual. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.